A rusted steel cylinder lies in darkness, 180 feet below the Taiwan Strait. No sunlight, no sound. Just cold water pressing against metal that hasn't moved since October 24, 1944. Inside, the torpedo room is still loaded. The crew compartments are still sealed. And somewhere in the silt, mixed with cables and broken instruments, are the answers to a question the U.S. Navy never wanted asked. How does America's most lethal submarine end up destroying itself? This is the USS Tang, the deadliest submarine in the Pacific War. And after 80 years, the wreck finally tells the truth. The Tang's location has been known since 1945, but no one has ever gone down to see it. The coordinates came from 9 survivors' men who escaped through a hatch using Momsen lung devices, while 78 of their crewmates died inside. They surfaced near Japanese patrol boats and were immediately captured. During interrogation, they gave the position northwest of Formosa, Taiwan Strait, roughly 24 degrees north, 119 degrees east. Depth, 180 feet. The U.S. Navy recorded it, filed it, and then left it alone. No expedition, no ROV survey, no underwater footage. Not in 1950, not in 2000, not even during the wave of WWII wreck discoveries between 2017 and 2024. The site sits in disputed waters between China and Taiwan, in shipping lanes still scattered with unswept mines and unexploded ordnance. The seabed is silt-heavy, fast-moving currents, low visibility. But it's shallow enough to reach. It always has been. In 2019, the Lost 52 project found the USS Grayback off Okinawa at 1,400 feet, nearly 8 times deeper. In 2006, a private team located the USS Grunio in the Bering Sea under pack ice. Both sites were surveyed, photographed, and documented. The families were notified. The Navy cooperated, but not with the Tang. When researchers have inquired about the site, they've been told it's legally protected as a war grave under the Sunken Military Craft Act of 2004. That law prohibits unauthorized disturbance of U.S. military wrecks. It's the same protection given to the USS Arizona in Pearl Harbor, but the Arizona has a memorial. It has ceremonies. It has transparency. The Tang has silence. The wreck sits in international waters technically, but the political geography is complicated. China claims territorial rights over much of the Taiwan Strait. Taiwan disputes those claims. Any attempt to survey the site would require permissions from multiple governments, none of whom have an incentive to cooperate. The U.S. Navy would need to formally request access, acknowledge the wreck's location publicly, and justify why a survey is necessary after 80 years. They haven't. Maritime archaeology teams have proposed surveying WWII wrecks in the Strait. Documentary crews working on submarine history projects have requested information about the site. Family members of Tang crew members have written to the Navy asking about documentation efforts. The responses have been minimal. Polite acknowledgments, references to legal protections, no commitments to survey work. What makes this shocking isn't technical difficulty, it's avoidance. The Tang sits in water shallow enough for commercial divers. The technology to image it has existed for decades. Side-scan sonar, remotely operated vehicles, photogrammetry, all standard tools that have been used on wrecks far less accessible. So why hasn't it been done? Some say it's out of respect. The Tang is a tomb. 78 men are still inside, many of them likely in the compartments where they died. Disturbing the site, even with cameras, feels like desecration. Others say it's because the Navy doesn't want footage of what's actually down there. Because the Tang didn't go down fighting the enemy. It went down because of its own torpedo. And if anyone were to explore that wreck, if they were to film the blast damage, recover fragments of the warhead, analyze the failure point in the guidance system, they'd be documenting one of the most catastrophic technological failures in U.S. naval history. A failure the Navy spent years covering up. The Mark 14 torpedo was introduced in 1931. For over a decade before the war, it was tested, refined, and declared operational. But when combat started in December 1941, submariners immediately reported problems. Torpedoes running 10 feet deeper than set. magnetic exploders detonating prematurely or not at all, contact exploders that crumpled on impact instead of triggering. Commanders were furious. Some filed formal complaints. Others conducted unauthorized tests in forward areas, risking their careers to prove the weapons were defective. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance denied there was a problem. They blamed the crews, poor maintenance, incorrect firing solutions, operator error. It took until September 1943, nearly 2 years into the war, for the Navy to officially acknowledge the depth-setting issue. The magnetic exploder wasn't deactivated Navy-wide until late 1943. The contact exploder wasn't fully redesigned until 1944. By then, dozens of patrols had been compromised. Targets escaped. Submarines were counterattacked because torpedoes exploded prematurely, giving away their position. And in at least 2 confirmed cases, USS Tullibee and USS Tang submarines were sunk by their own circular running torpedoes. That's not a war story. That's a scandal. And the wreck of the Tang is the physical proof. So the question isn't where the Tang is. It's what the wreck would prove if anyone were allowed to see it. On the night of October 24, 1944, the Tang was in the middle of its most successful patrol ever, and then it fired its last torpedo. 5th War Patrol. Formosa Strait. The Tang had already sunk 2 enemy transports that evening, adding to a record that made it the most lethal submarine in the U.S. fleet. 33 confirmed sinkings. Over 116,000 tons of Japanese shipping sent to the bottom. Commander Richard O. Kane was a legend. Aggressive, fearless. The kind of officer who surfaced his sub in the middle of enemy convoys and fired at point-blank range. He'd learned that style from another legend, Dudley Mush Morton, commander of the USS Wahoo, one of the most successful submarines of the early war. O'Kane had served as Morton's executive officer. He watched Morton take risks no one else would. Surface attacks in broad daylight, penetrating harbors, chasing destroyers instead of running. Morton died when the Wahoo was sunk in October 1943 by Japanese aircraft and depth charges in the La Perouse Strait. The entire crew was lost. O'Kane took command of the Tang in October 1943, exactly 1 year before the sinking. He ran the boat the way Morton had taught him. Fast, aggressive, overwhelming. And it worked. By October 1944, the Tang had completed 4 war patrols, sinking more ships per patrol than almost any other submarine in the Pacific. O'Kane's tactics were studied at the Submarine School in New London. His patrol reports were circulated to other skippers as examples of how to press an attack. The 5th Patrol started in late September 1944. The Tang left Pearl Harbor, refueled at Midway, and headed for the Formosa Strait, one of the most dangerous areas in the Pacific. Heavy Japanese naval presence, air patrols, minefields, shallow water that made evasion difficult. O'Kane didn't care. The strait was a choke point. Japanese convoys had to pass through it to reach the Philippines, where American forces were preparing for the invasion of Leyte. Every transport sunk meant fewer reinforcements, fewer supplies, fewer troops. The Tang sank its first ship on October 10th, then another on the 11th. By October 23rd, the boat had expended nearly all its torpedoes. O'Kane had 2 left. That night, the Tang spotted a convoy, 5 cargo ships, 2 escorts heading south. O'Kane maneuvered into position on the surface, running dark. Engines throttled back to reduce noise. The moon was nearly full. Visibility was good. Too good. He fired the first torpedo at 2:00 a.m. It ran true. The transport exploded and began to sink. He fired the second torpedo, number 24, at 2:30 a.m., and immediately something went wrong. Instead of running straight, the torpedo broached the surface. Survivors saw it. A white streak in the moonlight, phosphorescent wake cutting across the water. It veered hard to the left. The gyroscope had failed. The torpedo was running in a circle, back toward the Tang. O'Kane saw it. He shouted the order. All ahead flank, right full rudder. The diesel engines screamed. The sub began to turn. But a Belau-class submarine doing 20 knots on the surface needs more than 20 seconds to change course. They had less than that. Men on the bridge saw it coming. Some tried to jump, others froze. The torpedo struck the Tang on the port side, just aft of the control room. The explosion tore through the pressure hull. The shock wave killed men instantly. Ruptured lungs, shattered eardrums, blunt force trauma from being thrown against bulkheads. The stern flooded in seconds. The engine rooms went dark. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered, then died. In the forward torpedo room, men felt the blast, but didn't know what had happened. They heard rushing water. They heard screaming over the intercom. Then the intercom went dead. Chief Torpedoman's mate, William Leibold, made the call. He ordered the compartment sealed, no one in or out. Then he opened the locker and pulled out the Momsen lungs, rubber breathing bags with a mouthpiece, nose clip, and a small canister of soda lime to absorb carbon dioxide. There were 9 men in the compartment. 9 Momsen lungs. They flooded the room slowly, equalizing pressure with the sea outside. The water rose to their chests, their necks, their chins. When it reached the overhead, Leibold opened the hatch. One by one, they kicked toward the surface. The ascent took less than a minute. At 180 feet, nitrogen narcosis wasn't severe, but the pressure change was brutal. Eardrums ruptured, sinuses bled. One man passed out halfway up and had to be dragged by another. When they broke the surface, gasping, choking, bleeding from their noses and ears, they saw the convoy still burning in the distance, and they saw the Japanese patrol boats closing in. They were pulled from the water, stripped, beaten, and thrown into the hold of a destroyer. They spent the rest of the war in a POW camp near Tokyo. 78 men stayed below. That circular run wasn't an anomaly. It was a known recurring defect in the Mark 14 torpedo, a weapon that had plagued U.S. submarines since the first day of the war. The Mark 14 used a gyroscope to maintain a straight course after launch. The gyroscope was spun up to 18,000 RPM before firing, then locked into position based on the target's bearing. In theory, once the torpedo left the tube, it would follow that bearing until it hit something. In practice, the gyroscope could fail. A worn bearing, a misaligned spindle, a hairline crack in the casing. When it failed, the torpedo's rudder would swing hard over, and the weapon would turn in a circle, usually back toward the firing ship. It had happened before. In March 1944, the USS Tullabee fired a spread of torpedoes at a Japanese convoy off the coast of Japan. One turned and hit the Tullabee amidships. The sub sank in less than a minute. Only one man survived, gunner's mate C.W. Kuykendall, who was blown off the bridge by the explosion and later picked up by a Japanese destroyer. His account was initially questioned by some in the Navy. He'd been concussed, hypothermic, a prisoner of war for over a year. But his testimony was eventually accepted. O'Kane knew the story. Every submarine skipper in the Pacific knew it. And on the night of October 24, 1944, in the final seconds before impact, O'Kane knew exactly what was happening. Patrol reports from the Tang's Fifth War Patrol document repeated issues with torpedo performance throughout the mission. O'Kane and his crew had encountered erratic runs and targeting difficulties. They adjusted. They compensated. They kept firing, because that's what submariners did in 1944. They worked with what they had. But there's something about the wreck itself that could reveal more than any report ever could. If the torpedo hit where survivors said it did, the Tang's hull should show massive damage on the port side, and the blast pattern might tell a story. The official records don't. Balao-class submarines like the Tang were engineering marvels. Welded steel construction, double-hulled, with a pressure hull designed to withstand depth charges down to 400 feet. They were 301 feet long, 27 feet wide, displaced 2,400 tons submerged, and carried a crew of 10 officers and 70 enlisted men. The hull was divided into 8 watertight compartments: forward torpedo room, officers' quarters, control room, crew berthing, forward engine room, after engine room, maneuvering room, and after torpedo room. Each compartment could be sealed independently. In theory, the sub could survive flooding in 2 compartments and still surface. But a Mark 14 torpedo carried 668 pounds of Torpex explosive, a mixture of RDX, TNT, and aluminum powder that was 50% more powerful than TNT alone. It was designed to crack the keel of a heavy cruiser. On a surface submarine with no armor and thin plating, that kind of blast would be catastrophic. Based on survivor accounts, the torpedo hit on the port side, just aft of the control room. That's roughly midship, the widest part of the sub, where the main ballast tanks and critical systems were located. If the blast penetrated the pressure hull there, it would have caused immediate catastrophic flooding. The control room, where the diving station, the helm, the navigation table, and the radio room were located, would have flooded almost instantly. That's also where O'Kane would have been standing when the torpedo hit. If the control room flooded, the sub couldn't be saved. No way to control the dive planes, no way to blow ballast, no way to surface. The Tang would have gone down bow first, driven by the weight of the flooded forward compartments and the momentum from the engines still running at flank speed. Survivors in the forward torpedo room said the sub hit bottom in less than a minute. That matches. At 180 feet, with no buoyancy control, a Belau-class sub would sink at roughly 10 feet per second. The question is, what happened to the compartments that didn't flood immediately? One possibility: the after torpedo room. The Tang still had Mark 14s loaded in the stern tube's weapons that hadn't been fired. If the initial blast ruptured the pressure hull and created a shock wave through the substructure, it could have damaged those torpedoes or their storage systems. Another possibility: structural implosion. When a submarine compartment floods under pressure, the air inside compresses violently. If a watertight door fails, or if the dogging mechanism is damaged by the initial blast, the pressure differential can cause progressive flooding through multiple compartments. Either way, the damage was catastrophic and immediate. If an ROV ever films the site, the key will be the torpedo room, not the one that blew up. The forward room, where the last weapons were stored. Intact torpedoes sitting in their racks would confirm the Tang had no chance to return fire after the hit. The attack was over the moment the circular run started. But if those tubes are empty, or if there's evidence of emergency procedures, flooding valves opened, hatches secured, equipment staged for escape, it would show exactly how the crew responded in those final seconds. Blast scoring on the hull, the pattern of fragmentation, the direction of the shrapnel, the angle of the torn metal will show exactly where the torpedo hit and how the explosion propagated through the structure. If the damage is concentrated on the port side aft of the control room, it confirms the survivor accounts. If it's spread across multiple sections, it suggests the blast penetrated deeper before detonating. The position of the conning tower could also reveal if the Tang tried to maneuver at the last second. If the dive planes are angled or the rudder is turned hard over, it would show O'Kane's final commands were being executed even as the torpedo closed in. It didn't work. But it would explain the survivors' accounts of the descent: sudden, violent, and irreversible. And then there's the crew. 78 men are still inside. Some in compartments that flooded in seconds. Men who drowned before they could react. Others possibly in spaces that flooded more slowly, where they had time to understand what was happening. If human remains are still present and at that depth, in cold water with low oxygen and heavy siltation, they likely are. Forensic analysis could confirm how fast the flooding happened, whether men had time to reach escape equipment, whether they died from drowning, blast trauma, or pressure-related injuries. The Momsen lungs used by the 9 survivors were recovered by the Japanese and later returned to the U.S. Navy. They're in a museum now, behind glass, with a plaque explaining their use. But there were more Momsen lungs on board the Tang when it sailed. If any are found in the wreck, still in their storage lockers, unopened, it means men in other compartments never had a chance to reach them. Or that the flooding was so fast, escape wasn't possible. And then there's what might still be in the control room: logs, charts, communication records, anything that shows what O'Kane and his crew knew about the torpedo's condition before they fired it. The Tang sank more enemy ships than any other U.S. submarine in World War II, and it's the only one that killed itself doing it. 33 confirmed sinkings. Over 116,000 tons of Japanese shipping sent to the bottom in 5 patrols. Oil tankers, troop transports, cargo vessels, supply ships that never made it to the Philippines, to Formosa, to the garrisons starving on Pacific islands. Every ship the Tang sank was a blow to Japan's logistics network. By 1944, Japan's merchant fleet was being destroyed faster than it could be replaced. Submarines like the Tang were strangling the empire, cutting off oil from the Dutch East Indies, rice from Indochina, iron from Manchuria. The Tang's 5th patrol alone before the sinking accounted for over 30,000 tons of enemy shipping. It was, by any measure, a strategic success. Commander Richard O'Kane received the Medal of Honor while still a prisoner of war. The citation, written in 1945, called him the most aggressive and successful submarine commander of the war. It praised his conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, and his indomitable determination. It mentioned the Tang's record. It mentioned the final attack. It described the sinking as a tragic loss. It did not mention the torpedo malfunction. It did not mention the Mark 14's documented history of failures. It did not mention that submarine commanders across the Pacific had been fighting faulty weapons for 3 years. The 9 survivors were repatriated in August 1945 after Japan's surrender. They were flown to Hawaii, debriefed by naval intelligence, given medical examinations, and sent home on leave. Some wrote memoirs. Others never spoke about it publicly. Chief Leibold, who made the decision to flood the torpedo room and attempt the Momsen lung escape, gave interviews to the Navy, describing the procedure step by step, clinical, detailed, focused on the mechanics of survival. O'Kane himself wrote a book in 1977, Clear the Bridge, The War Patrols of the USS Tang. It's considered one of the best submarine memoirs of the war. Detailed, tactical, honest about mistakes and near misses. The final chapter, about the sinking, describes the circular run, the impact, the escape. He praises the crew. He acknowledges the loss. He does not speculate extensively about why the torpedo failed. He does not question the broader Mark 14 program. He frames it as one of the tragic uncertainties of war. In interviews later in life, O'Kane spoke carefully about the sinking. He emphasized the crew's bravery, the successful patrols, the mission accomplished before the loss. But patrol reports and technical assessments from the Tang's final mission document ongoing issues with torpedo performance, irregular runs, targeting discrepancies, mechanical concerns that required constant adjustment. Those reports exist in Navy archives. They're available to researchers, but they're technical documents, buried in files, rarely cited in popular histories. The wreck could bring those details into focus in a way no report ever could. After the war, the Navy designated Tang's approximate location as a military grave site. Under the Sunken Military Craft Act of 2004, it's legally protected from unauthorized disturbance. It's treated with the same status as other war grave sites where American service members remain entombed. But, unlike the USS Arizona, which has a memorial, annual ceremonies, and ongoing preservation efforts, the Tang has no public-facing commemoration. No marked site, no regular observance. The Tang exists in official records as a loss due to own ordnance, a clinical phrase that appears in casualty reports and historical databases. It tells the facts, but it hides the context. Families of the 78 lost men have, over the decades, sought information about the wreck. They've written to the Navy. They've asked about survey possibilities. They've requested updates on preservation status. Responses have acknowledged the loss, referenced legal protections, and noted the logistical and diplomatic complexities of accessing a site in disputed international waters. No surveys have been conducted. No footage exists. No formal documentation effort has been announced. The wreck matters because it's evidence, not just of what happened that night, but of a weapons system that failed submariners for years. If the site were ever surveyed, recovered components from the torpedo's guidance system could be analyzed for the exact failure mode, mechanical wear, material defect, design flaw, That kind of forensic analysis was never done in the immediate post-war period. The Mark 14 investigations between 1941 and 1945 focused on the major systemic issues: depth control, magnetic exploders, contact exploders. Those were documented, acknowledged, and eventually fixed. But the gyroscope failures, the circular runs that sank Tullaby and Tang, were never comprehensively studied. There were incident reports, after-action summaries, but no recall, no full engineering review. The Navy moved on. The war ended. The Mark 14 was replaced. The files were archived. But the Tang is still down there, holding the proof. Crew remains, if still present and identifiable through modern forensic methods, could confirm how the sinking unfolded, how fast compartments flooded, whether survival equipment was accessible, whether the crew had any chance to react. Recovered personal effects letters, photographs, identification tags, personal items would give faces and stories to the 78 names on the casualty list. Right now, they're numbers in a database. Items from the wreck would make them individuals again. A wedding ring, a photograph, a letter never mailed. Those are the things that turn history into memory. The 9 survivors are gone now. Richard O'Kane died in 1994. The last survivors passed in the years that followed. The families of the lost men, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren are the only ones left. Some have never seen a picture of the Tang. Didn't know their relatives served on the boat until they found documents in family records. The Navy has never offered formal closure beyond notifications of loss and posthumous honors. A survey of the site, even a non-invasive remote imaging survey, would mean something. It would acknowledge not just the loss, but the cause. It would provide documentation for families. It would create a visual record for history. It would say clearly that the Tang didn't sink because of enemy action. It sank because of a weapon that the U.S. Navy knew was flawed. That's not speculation. That's documented fact. But documentation requires access, and access for 80 years has been restricted because the wreck doesn't just tell the Tang's story. It tells the story of every submariner who went to war with Mark 14 torpedoes, every commander who filed complaints that were dismissed, every crew that loaded weapons into tubes and hoped they would work as designed. The Navy doesn't want that story widely told. It wants the Tang remembered for its victories, its record, its heroism. Not for the weapon that killed it. Because somewhere in that wreck, in the debris field or the control room or the shattered hull plating, there's evidence of exactly what failed, and when the Navy knew it was failing. But one question's never been answered: why hasn't anyone been allowed to look?